Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Global Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is somebody who really needs no introduction to gagglers. He's been on a number of times before. This is Paul Craig Roberts, renowned economist and also extraordinary geopolitical thinker and analyst, and we're greatly honored to have him join us. So welcome, Paul. And plus,
Well,
you
thank you, George. I hope I can live up to that introduction.
I'm sure you will. Now, you have been distinctive in your analysis of the war in Ukraine, distinctive from most, alt media commentators, in that you have been very critical of Russia's war effort, and that's really been quite consistent, over the past 4 years. And so I want to see where we are right now, because in the last few weeks, we had the 28-point peace plan that was whittled down to a 20-point plan, which was flatly rejected by Russia. And then we had really two quite dramatic developments. We had the apparent assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin. Let's say apparent, that's what the Russians themselves claim. So it's not claimed by bloggers, it's the Russian government that claims it. And then, of course, we had the US boarding of a Russian flagged ship, kind of unheard of. Really, it could never happen in the Cold War, even in the post-Cold War world. So these are quite dramatic developments. So where are we? Where do you see things developing from now?
Well, George, I think it shows my concerns were correct, that Putin's non-response to provocations leads to more provocations and to more serious provocations. It's like you say, it's unprecedented for a Russian ship to be seized on the high seas. It's also unprecedented for the United States or British, it was one or the other, to try to assassinate the president of Russia in his home. Now, you say it's unclear that it's a Russian claim, but actually, George, the Russians uh, have from drones used in the attack the navigation data, and it proves that it was American guided. They sent the data to Washington, which was a way of saying, hey, look, we know you did it. Now, the Russians don't make a big issue of it because clearly it would require that Putin do something, and he's determined not to. It's just like he would not acknowledge that the attack on the Russian strategic bombing fleet was an act of war. He said it was an act of terrorism. And in that way, he could avoid the requirements of Russian strategic doctrine. And again, with the attack on his home, um, he won't acknowledge it because it requires a decisive action. And he doesn't want to make any decisive action. So he's trying to avoid war. He's also trying to hold on to hopes for a peaceful settlement with the United States. That is, in my view, a total delusion. There's no prospect, and I don't know why the Kremlin can't accept the fact, but they can't. And so I suspect the next provocation will be worse. And they'll keep on getting worse. And at some point, Russia will have to surrender or fight.
Right.
That's where it's headed. There's no way out of it. Particularly now that Trump is so confident, so militaristic. He's read the riot act to Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, Mexico, Iran.
Right. Right. Um, so the next, provocation you think probably will be something like yet another assassination attempt, or maybe an attack on again the strategic bomber fleet, or what kind of provocations do you expect?
Well, I don't know. I never would have expected the strategic bombing fleet to be attacked. I never would have expected Putin's residence to be attacked. So I don't know what the fools will do next, but they're confident, and they've been made confident by Putin's non-response. You see, he's destroyed his credibility in Washington, his zero credibility. They don't pay any attention to anything he says. And it wasn't Russia that rejected the original Trump 28 points. There were many promising elements in that Trump proposal, but the military security complex quickly got a hold of Trump, and he reduced 10 of them. He took 10 of them out.
Yes.
And I think maybe that's what killed it. Um, he took them out, I think, before the Russians ever had a chance to think about it. So you see, look, we know that Trump is not serious about an agreement with Russia because he has never sat down with Putin and said, okay, tell me, what are these conditions you keep talking about that end the root cause of the conflict? And let's see if I can accept them, and if not, if which ones I can, if we can work out an agreement. This has never happened. It's never happened. And the negotiations have been carried on in behalf of Putin by Kirill Dmitriev, who is serving his business interests, and on Trump's part by his son-in-law and a real estate developer who are who are serving their business interests. And Trump's really not part of it.
Mhm.
So that type of situation can't produce any sort of meaningful agreement. And the agreement I think Putin has been talking about all this time is a mutual security agreement that ends the conflict, not merely in Ukraine, but between the East and the West. He wants NATO off of Russia's borders, and I think what he sees in a mutual security agreement is no need for NATO. Now, of course, Trump may kill NATO if he's going to attack Denmark.
Right. Right. But this is why it gets a little puzzling, trying to figure out what Russia's doing. So Russia kind of keeps grinding out this war in the Donbass, which can go on for quite some time. But even if, let's say, Russia prevails, Russia drives out the Ukrainians from the Donbass, Russia takes Kherson, takes Zaporozhye, that doesn't address Russia's problems because the war will go on. The Ukraine government, NATO, they will be determined to keep the war going. So that doesn't solve Russia's problems. Even if you win all that, if you take all this territory, NATO's not going to give up. NATO's just going to continue with this war for years to come.
Yes, it's a it's a foolish stance that the Kremlin has taken for 4 years. Uh, they needed to end that war very quickly before the West got all involved and had such a stake in it. And it could have ended very quickly. You know, this recent attack on Ukraine, which now has so much of the country in the dark without power, it was really not an attack on the electrical system. That was uh, an unexpected result. It was an attack on an aviation repair facility in the western Ukraine. And the attack in Kiev was also on military targets, but they had the effect of destroying much of the electricity generating capability of the country. Well, one or two such attacks would end the war. They would simply, Ukraine would be in the dark. Nothing could move, no power, no troops, no supplies could be sent to the front. The government couldn't communicate. So Russia can shut this down in 2 or 3 hours, and they don't do anything. And the original excuse was, oh, we don't want to kill too many of our Ukrainian brethren. Well, they've killed far more than they ever would have killed if they had ended this war at the beginning. So why didn't it? Well, I have always thought that Putin was using the war to try to get a mutual security agreement. So he has a stake in it continuing. He's hoping that at some point the West, to get rid of the trouble and all of that, will agree. Well, it's not going to happen. So I think we've reached the point where Putin's connection to reality isn't as strong as it should be or needs to be.
Mhm. Now, what do you think of the scenario? I think was outlined at times by some people that Putin is replaced. You know, somebody younger, more dynamic, more energetic takes over. First of all, do you think that's likely to happen? A second, even if it does happen, would that make a difference?
That's Gilbert Doctorow.
Gilbert Doctorow has articulated it, yeah.
Yeah, well, he has a point. And the point is this long drawn out, never ending, ever widening war serving Russia. And it clearly isn't. So why is Putin doing it? And Dr. Rowe, who assiduously watches the Russian news talk shows and all that, it says the position has changed and that the commentators are ever more critical of the way Putin is conducting this, and that the nationalistic uh, feelings in Russia are growing, and they want the war won. They don't want it to continue. And I think he's right that the Russians are beginning, or some of them are beginning to feel the humiliation in all of this total disrespect for their country, for their president. And I think that they're tired of it. So I don't know how much jeopardy Putin is in. I don't watch these Russian programs. I don't know. I try to talk to a couple of journalists who've interviewed me over the years, so I get to talk to them. And it seems like the country is just it's dissatisfied, or increasing amount of it is, but that they're going to stay with Putin, and they still have this view that if Putin would actually do something, it would cause the war to worsen. They don't see my point that putting his foot down strong would make people in the West think about the consequences. Uh, Increasingly, members of government and various parts of the Russian intellectual enterprise are saying we need to do something strong to let them know we actually make business and mean business. Otherwise, they won't stop.
But this is why it's so surprising that there's been this level of tolerance. I mean, to seize a Russian flagged ships, to attack the strategic bomber fleet, to attempt to assassinate the leader. This kind of thing didn't even happen in the Yeltsin time. I mean, we all ever, oh, Yeltsin was such a terrible time, but no one tried this nonsense during the Yeltsin years. So it's quite surprising that Russia tolerates this. I can't explain it. I mean, that's why they would tolerate this.
Well, they didn't need to do it during the Yeltsin years. He seems to have been pretty much an American puppet.
Right, right. But nonetheless, it was still
They didn't do it. They certainly didn't do it during the Soviet years because
that's right. Yes.
they would have expected Washington, New York, and all the rest to go up and smoke. So, I don't know why they tolerated either. And the only thing, as I said a minute ago, that I can think of is that Putin wants to use the war to get a mutual security agreement. He, he and Lavrov tried very hard from December of 2021 to February of 2022 to get a mutual security agreement. And he got complete cold shoulder from the Biden regime, from the EU, and from NATO. And when he saw that the army we had built and trained for Ukraine was about to enter the two breakaway republics in Donbass. That forced his hand, but he wasn't prepared. He had made no preparations. And the original Russian force was outnumbered by the Ukrainians, something like 3-1.
But this is why, and now they're really getting to the question of, what could be a painful question, which is, well, that Russia just simply doesn't have the strength, the preparation, the energy, the know-how that the Soviets were able to do. I mean, if you think of the Soviet military operations, Hungary 56, it was over very quickly. Czechoslovakia 68, over very quickly. Even what they did in Afghanistan is forgotten that the coup that they arranged in Kabul was brilliantly executed. I mean, that was the Soviets did that. They sent in their paratroopers, they seized power, and Afghanistan was then for a while under Soviet control. So has Russia just simply lost that ability that the Soviets had had?
I think what's happened is uh, the Russian intellectuals and the ones with business interests with the West, they were called for a period Atlanticist integrationists, and they are in love with the West. They want to be part of the West. And I think they have been a constraint on Putin, but I think he's actually one of them himself.
Right. Yep.
And so the emphasis is on being accepted by the West. And so this means they don't really stand up to the bullying. And if they stand up to the bullying, they think this confirms all the American and European propaganda against them. It confirms the propaganda that, see, we told you after Ukraine, it's Germany, and then France, and then England. And I think they're really afraid of that. And they're afraid of that, I don't think for military reasons, but because it is a decisive break from Russia and the West. They'll never be able to restore the prospect of being part of the Western uh, area. So but this is speculation. I don't know this, but I've thought, the more I think, I can't really come up with another alternative. And I have personal experience with these Atlanticist integrationists. Some years ago, I was invited to come to Moscow to address a big conference, and it was about, can we have another Yalta? In other words,
Right.
they were working on a mutual security agreement idea even then. And I told them I didn't, I wasn't going to come to Moscow. And so they said, well, look, well, you do it online. We're going to put up this big screen, and we want you to give the opening address and the closing address. Well, I had to agree to that. They were going to go to that effort. So I said, all right. So as I later learned, there were two groups in this. Half of them were Atlanticist integrationists, totally opposed to me speaking. And the others were more sensible people and wanted to make decisions based on analysis and not hopes. So I began the opening address. Well, before I got halfway through it, they were trying to cut me off. The chairman of the session was breaking in saying, hurry up, we're running out of time. Well, I wasn't close to the time allocated.
Right.
All right. Well, I persisted, gave the talk. And then later I got this message, oh, we're so far behind, we're running out of time. There's no way for you to give the closing remark. So they simply cut me out.
Right.
They didn't want to hear. They didn't want the people, the conference to hear. Well, this was several years ago. I think I wrote about it. Um, uh, so I have experienced them in that way. I also have experienced the influence of their propaganda within Russia on the journalist, because most of them are subject to this type of thinking. And also, they think if we criticize Putin, we're being disloyal to Russia, just like the Europeans and the Russians. I mean, and the Americans. So if you look at all of these kinds of constraints, in my view, it puts Russia in a situation of unreality. They can't accept the obvious facts because they have these hopes, and the hopes have displaced understanding. And I think that's Putin's problem. It's and this is why I think it's so dangerous, George, because the West has concluded that the Russia is there's nothing there, that they can just walk all over it, like you've emphasized. We can take the Russian flag ships. You ask what they're going to do next. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. Navy sails into the Black Sea and impounds all the Russian ships at Sebastopol.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either.
I wouldn't be surprised. They are convinced by now they could get away with it. What
Yep.
would Putin do? He'd say, well, this is an act of terrorism. It's not an act of war. I don't have to do anything.
Right.
So uh, sooner or later, I think the proverbial hits the fan.
Right.
The, it, there's a provocation that can't be explained away or not acknowledged or ignored. That's been my fear from the beginning. And this is why I think that it was a huge mistake for Putin to let this war go on when he could end it. All he has to do is close down Ukraine. They can do that. Look, they accidentally did it.
Right. Right. That's right. But you see, when you said about this Yalta 2.0, I always find it so frustrating when Russians talk like this. The way you get to Yalta is to show that you are overwhelmingly strong, and then the West has to accommodate itself to you. That's what happened with Yalta. Up until the Soviet victory at Stalingrad, the West wasn't negotiating with Stalin. They couldn't really be bothered. Once after Stalingrad, and they realized the scale of the Soviet victory, that forced the negotiation, Tehran and then Yalta. So now, I mean, unless you can decisively win in Ukraine, you're not going to get a Yalta 2.0. The West isn't going to negotiate with Putin. Why would they need to negotiate with him? Well, they can just do whatever they feel like.
That's my position. I agree with you totally. And what's so puzzling is why the Russians don't understand that.
I don't get it. They used to
I,
be realistic. I mean, they used to be very good at realism. No
that's,
sentimentality, idealism, just reality of power.
yeah, that's, that's right. If Putin had put his foot down, I mean, look, I don't know why he accepted the Maiden Revolution.
Yeah,
He did nothing. And he even gave bad advice to the Russian friendly president.
yeah.
Don't do anything.
Don't do anything.
Come here. Don't do anything. And so, a conspiracy theorist would look at all this and say that Putin was a CIA agent.
There are conspiracy theorists who argue that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so I'm glad that you see it this way too, George, and that we don't have to argue about that.
No. What is still surprising after all that is that the Russians still refuse to say anything negative about Trump. It's somehow, you can say what you like about Obama, about Biden, everyone else, but you can't say anything negative about Trump. Now, I mean, if you have look at the assassination attempt, either Trump masterminded this, or he didn't know about it, which doesn't say much for his control of the government. Either way, this is not someone you want to be doing any business with, and yet they still, they still treat Trump prior to, we take it very seriously. He really wants to bring peace to Ukraine. We have to deal with him. He's very, very, very serious person. It just seems baffling why they continue with that.
Yeah, it's baffling and dangerous, I think, and I think it's irresponsible of the Russians to behave this way because it will go further. And uh, so, anyhow, we're
That's
stuck with it for now. For years, Dr. O was my critic for saying that Putin was mishandling the situation. But sometime toward the end of last year, he wrote that he had changed his mind, that I had been right all the time and he'd been wrong.
Well,
And he's been on the case. And of course, he has more uh, firsthand information than I do. He has a home in Russia and he goes there every now and then and stays a while and talks to people. And he's able to watch Russian television uh, from Belgium, the actual shows.
mhm,
But he can't read RT.
right. Well,
They won't let him have RT, but he can watch the Russian news programs. I don't understand any of this, why things work like that. But
but there's another aspect to, which is just Russia's geopolitical situation. And we can watch in Iran. We don't, obviously, I don't know how that's going to play out. But first of all, how do you see what's going to happen in Iran in the coming days?
well, I think in his last visit to Washington, Netanyahu in December gave Trump his marching orders. The United States is going to participate in a major attack on Iran. I saw and reported, I think, on my website the last week or two where the Israeli Channel 12 had reported that the Israeli government had put the Israeli military uh, on command to prepare for a war, simultaneous war against the Houthis, Lebanon, and Iran. So if they're ordered to prepare for that, then that's an indication that Netanyahu has his American puppet on the leash and as the attack dog to lead this. I think after the devastation Israel experienced in its so-called 12-day war with Iran, they realize that they can't take Iran on by themselves, and therefore it's dependent on us. Well, if you look at the history of the United States policy and the Middle East in this first quarter of the 21st century, we've taken out several countries for Israel. The war on terror was a hoax. It was the war for Greater Israel. We took out Libya, Iraq, and Syria. And we did it with our blood and our money for Israel. That's what the war on terror was. It was a cover for America to serve Israel's agenda of Greater Israel. So why is it going to stop? If anything, the Israelis' control of the United States is stronger than ever.
Right,
And, and they're certainly extremely strong over Britain. So neither, in my view, neither the United States nor Britain are sovereign countries.
right. But if, let's say, Trump does launch some missile attacks on Iran, that won't cause regime change. That's not going to affect things. I mean, that'll just lead to actually the people rallying behind the government. So that won't actually deliver what Israel wants, unless there's another plan. There may be some other plan in the works. Some, what they did to Maduro. Hoist somebody else into power who's going to work with the Americans. So they may do something along those lines. But I don't see a missile attacks actually delivering regime change.
Well, it would be more than a missile attack. Trump said we are locked and loaded and ready to go. And he said if any of the protesters are harmed by the Iranian government, we're going in. So I think it's more than a missile attack. And I think the notification that the Israeli Channel 12 reported last week indicates some sort of major attack on the country that means soldiers. Um, Now, of course, it may not be necessary. Now, I haven't seen the latest day or two's reports on the protest, but it's clear this is an American-Israeli
Hmm.
provoked operation, just like they attempted a few years back with the
Correct.
Green Revolution.
Correct.
All of the money goes in and bribes people, and they get in the streets, and the news say they're protesting inflation, but the Iranian government sees it as very serious, and so they may have a color revolution.
Correct.
If a country doesn't have a very strong ethnic nationalism, it's vulnerable. It's very easy to overthrow it. Everybody wants money.
Correct.
You just go in and you remember what Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State, did and said, and she said this publicly on television that the United States spent $5 billion bribing people in Kiev to
Correct.
overthrow the government. She said that. Um, so this is our way. We did it in Georgia and then sent them into South Ossetia. Um, and we recently tried it again, but it failed. And even the Georgian government said that this was an American NGO operation trying to overturn the democratically elected government. You see, George, all of this started when Putin at the 2007 uh, Munich Security Conference shocked everybody because we thought he would be a continuation
Correct.
of,
Yeltsin.
of Yeltsin because Yeltsin appointed him. We said he's Yeltsin's appointee, he's just another puppet. But in 2007, he announced at the security conference that Russia did not accept American unilateralism. It did not accept a unipolar world. That Russia was a sovereign country, and would defend its interest. So he rejected the doctrine of hegemony that Wolfowitz had declared in 1991. And so the immediate response was we trained the Georgian army and sent them into South Ossetia.
Right. Right. Exactly. Let's say. Yeah.
Yeah. And we tried overthrowing Ukraine before we succeeded in 2014. There were one or two attempts. Um, and so then we succeeded. And uh, for some reason, at that point, there was no Russian response like there was to Georgia. They accepted it. And And Putin had these hopes on the Minsk agreement, and he held on to these hopes for 8 years when it was obvious it was not an agreement that was being honored.
Right. Right.
So it seems to me it's a mess Putin made by accepting all the moves against him after the South Ossetia thing. He handled that effectively.
So, in other words, what you say is that he delivered that speech at Munich. That put everyone on alert, the Americans on alert, but then he didn't follow through on that speech. He should have then said, okay, well, now basically, yeah, the West is out to crush Russia. The West is out to turn Russia into a vassal state. Then you have to prepare. And you kind of get a feeling that that preparation was not done.
That's right. Except, well, it was done in this way, George, because they have announced super weapon after super weapon. And it is clear that compared to anything the United States has, these are super weapons. We don't have anything in the arsenal like the Russians have. And furthermore, nothing in the Russian arsenal can be blocked. They can't be intercepted or shut down. And they travel so fast we don't even have any reaction time. So he waves these weapons. Instead of doing anything, he waves these weapons and he hopes that the terrific destructive power of these weapons makes the West see that it's being foolish. But it doesn't because he hasn't any credibility. Nobody thinks he'll use them.
Right. That's it. That's the point. I mean, and that's always been the problem with nuclear weapons. Yeah, you've got them, but nobody really believes you're going to use them. So
Yeah.
therefore, they have very limited utility because you're like, well, yeah, you can threaten to use nuclear weapons, but you're not going to use them. So therefore, we don't take this seriously, and that's really the problem for Russia. But there's also this other aspect. If Iran does go down, then Russia will have lost Venezuela, Iran, Syria, really within a 12-month period. And then you've got all these other states like Armenia and Azerbaijan, which are now clearly drifting into the Western orbit. That's a serious kind of geopolitical shift against Russia.
That's right. And it will destroy BRICS. It will destroy the new Chinese Silk Road. It's and it clearly is Washington's intent. Um, uh, uh, BRICS will collapse because the members will see there's no protection in Russia and China. I mean, China's the same way. It doesn't do anything either.
Right. Yeah.
The United States has, in recent years, repudiated the one China doctrine established in law by President Nixon in the 1970s. He said, look, this one China, Taiwan belongs to China. Well, we've created now the impression that China, like Greenland, belongs to the United States. And we are going to protect it with our Navy. And there was an announcement by Trump, who knows if it's true or false, that he was sending hundreds of American ballistic missiles to Taiwan for their defense. Well, you would think that China would realize that the one China policy is being repudiated
Right.
and that there's going to be an American occupation force in Taiwan and do something about it.
Right.
But they're just like the Russians. They don't do anything but talk.
Right. Well, China's been talking for really 75 years that they're going to take Taiwan. I mean, they haven't done it. And so years go by, and the Americans showed, in the case of Venezuela, that they can just do it. They'll just do it and then present the world with a fait accompli. Well, what are you going to do about it? I mean, you're going to talk about international law? Well, go ahead, talk about it. So, what Trump did was an object lesson. Well, this is what you do. This is how you do statecraft. You don't just talk, you just go ahead and do it. But just threatening to do something and then not doing it, really, that's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, it's going to get you in the wrong where.
Right.
They're going to say, look, there's nothing there. We can walk over that country. We can walk over that government. And that's what they do to Putin. They just walk over him. They try to kill him in his own home.
Yeah.
And he won't acknowledge the fact
Right.
publicly.
Right. So what's the next step for Trump? Do you think Trump is now going to make his move on Cuba? Is that the plan? He's going to now try and overthrow the government in Cuba?
Well, if we take him at his word, the trouble with Trump is he says so many things, and they really are just threats for negotiation purposes. He makes threats in order to get an agreement and withdraws the threat. And we saw that with the tariffs. Um, so you never know whether this is he's fishing. I'll threaten them and see what they do, and maybe I won't have to do anything. So I don't know. But on the other hand, they may have a color revolution in Cuba. All it takes is money. So that's all it takes. You get money and get people in the streets. There you go. And the same for Colombia. I don't think the United States would be capable of putting troops into Venezuela and Colombia. They're huge territories and jungles.
Correct.
The
Correct.
last time we tried that in Vietnam, we got our butts kicked.
Correct.
And so I just don't know that. But if, for example, the way he intends to control Venezuela is intimidate the government by the kidnapping. And then he tells them, I'm going to leave you alone as long as you do as you're told. And not only will I leave you alone, I'm going to give you hundreds of millions of dollars for your personal pocket. And he'll bribe the government, he'll bribe the military. And of course, the Venezuelan upper class, they have suffered under the peasant-oriented government that came in actually before Chavez, because the nationalization of the Venezuelan resources began in the 70s, and Chavez completed them. Maduro had nothing to do
No.
with it. It's all done. And so he'll use the remnants of the elite class and the government in place, and that's his intention of how he's going to rule it. The American oil companies will come in and take over the oil again, and other companies will come in and take the mining, and that's what he'll probably try with Colombia.
Well,
Uh,
that's interesting. Does that model, would that model work in Cuba? Would it work in Iran? Because it's an interesting model, but would it work?
um, we'll find out if it works in Venezuela. The reports are kind of vague as to what the Venezuelan government's position is on this proposal. I've seen some statements that the woman who was vice president is now serving as president, um, that she's offered to let the oil companies in, and as long as they share the wealth with Venezuelans and don't just appropriate it all for themselves. But I don't know. You can't believe any news report any longer. They're all planted stories to serve some agenda or some purpose. So you really don't know. We successfully overthrew the first Iranian elected government in the 50s. The same way that we're trying again
Good.
in Iran, with bribes to people to go protest in the streets. And it's very curious if all of those photographs of people in Tehran, if that's actually going on now, and it's not some ancient
Good.
photo or some AI generated thing, it's curious that there would be so many Iranians helping the United States overthrow their own country, because there goes the oil. They'll be, you know, looted.
Good. But
And
yeah,
should they be in favor of that? I mean, don't those people know they're under threat? They're under threat of being destroyed as a sovereign country. So why are they helping the people?
well, but you've seen that before. I mean, you remember, the Serbs did that with Milosevic. Milosevic was the guy who actually stood up to NATO, withstood 11 weeks of bombing by NATO, and then the Serbs rose up, threw out Milosevic, and thought that they would get a reward from the West. The West just simply stole Kosovo. That's your reward. We're just going to take Kosovo, and that's all there is to it. So the Serbs were deluded. I think, a lot of countries just are stupid. I think, and stupid and very venal. They'll take money.
Yeah, and that's the reason I think the color revolutions work for the states, and that's why they persist. In fact, I'm expecting one in Hungary.
I think that's coming. You see it all the time. Constant demonstrations. Amazing. It's like you step out of the house and there's another protest against Orban. So it's kind of creating this momentum. Oh, he's on the way out. He's finished. He's gone. He's through. And so the election, but in 3 months' time, there's a sort of sense of inevitability that this is the end of the road for him. It's very much like what they did with Milosevic. Oh, he's finished. He's done. He's going to lose.
Yeah, and the governments don't stop this subversion. They allow American money, Western money, German money to come in and destabilize themselves. Uh, they're faced with insurrection. Just as Trump is faced now in Minnesota, he's facing an absolute total insurrection. So where is he? He's out parading around all over the world as if he's the master of the universe. And he's got an insurrection right at home,
Right.
right at home. The mayor of Minneapolis, the governor of Minnesota, they're in full scale resurrection. Well, when a few Trump people, the January 6 protesters, simply attended a political rally, they were declared insurrectionists, picked up, arrested, and imprisoned.
Yeah.
Well, what's happening now that we have a real insurrection, a
Correct.
complete uh, refusal to accept federal law? You have the elected Democrats in Minnesota taking the side of illegal immigrant invaders. This is insurrection. Why aren't there arrest warrants out for the mayor, for the governor, for all who are organizing and participating in this? So, Trump's not even the master of his own country, but he pretends to be the master of the world, of Cuba, of Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico, Iran.
But this is what's so bizarre about Trump, and you kind of wonder how much he understands about anything. I mean, he has an insurrection in his own country, and yet when he tells the Iranian leaders, who are also the insurrection, also a violent insurrection, well, if you use any kind of force against the insurrectionists, I'm going to come down on you like a ton of bricks. I'm going to bomb you in response. So don't you see that, this is how governments are supposed to respond to violent insurrections? They're supposed to use the forces of the state. It's just like this thing he's doing with Maduro. This is lawfare. This is the very lawfare that was used against him. For 10 years, there was a lawfare against him. The same people, he's empowering the same people, the Southern District of New York that worked against him. It's like he doesn't understand that he's empowering the very people that hate him and want to destroy him.
Yep, that's right. Um, well, we'll see. We'll see, George. Um, Trump um, is not only not in control, he also can't stand up to Netanyahu.
No.
And we actually faced with the situation that Netanyahu, that Israel is able to send the United States to war.
No. Yes.
And they're able to prevent anyone from criticizing anything they do because that's anti-Semitism
Yeah.
and you get fired from your job. Now I see in Britain where you used to be, it's even worse.
Yeah.
They have now officially defined those who protest against the Israeli genocide in Gaza as terrorists. So once they're defined officially as terrorists, they're now subject to the Terrorism Act of 2000 and can be imprisoned as terrorists. So in Britain today, those who criticize Israeli policies get a prison sentence. And some of them in jail at the current time are conducting a hunger strike. And the British media doesn't mention it.
But
But the
yeah,
British media is all upset because ICE,
that's right.
that is, the
Yeah,
immigration authorities,
in
killed a woman
in the
in
United
Minneapolis.
States, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're very agitated about what goes on in Minnesota. They don't even know where Minnesota is, but they're very agitated about it. It's very interesting transformation because the British used to be much more even-handed when it came to the Middle East because the British actually knew these Zionist terrorists. They had bad experience with them. They used to assassinate British officials. So, when I was growing up, the British were not at all, enthusiastic about Israel because they remembered, Menachem Begin. They dealt with Menachem Begin in the days of Palestine. But this transformation into now Britain is even worse than the United States. That just shows how effectively this lobby has worked in Britain.
Yeah, it has total control. It's no, you see, in the United States and in Britain, Israel has been able to abolish free speech. Free speech is a constitutionally protected amendment. So the Israelis have been able to violate, abolish, disregard, have the American government disregard its own constitution. So there's no free speech in either country when it comes to criticizing Israel. Um, for example, if there are a number of states in the United States, Texas and Florida, for example, where if you criticize Israel, you're not allowed to work for the state government and you cannot have a contract with the state to supply goods or services. So in effect, you have no free speech, and this is legislation passed by the state legislatures and signed into law by the Republican governors.
How does that get around the First Amendment? I've never understood because that the First Amendment is supposed to outlaw government discrimination by viewpoint. So how does that get around it?
Uh, because you are imprisoned or you are fired or you are somehow punished if you exercise free speech in regard to Israel.
Mhm.
You might have it in regard to some other things, but not Israel. So, so you do not, if your free speech upsets in any way Israel, you don't have it.
Right.
You look what if you're in a corporation, they fire you because they don't want boycotts from the Jewish lobby. If you're an American student, they throw you out of the university. If you're a foreign student in the United States, Trump expels you simply for exercising free speech, if it has anything to do with Israel, critical of Israel. So, and as we just said, in Britain, it's gone further because the protesters against what Israel's doing in Gaza are now officially terrorists and are arrested and imprisoned as terrorists under the Terrorism Act. So, by declaring them to be terrorists, it made them subject to this act. Well, where do you think that came from? The British didn't think it up on their own.
That's very true. I remember years ago, at the time of the preparation for the invasion of Iraq, you wrote a column and you put it in a very stark way. Why doesn't the Bush administration explain to the American public why it's going to war against Iraq? And I think it was a very striking expression because for all the talk of Saddam Hussein, this and that, basically the Bush administration never really explained what was the reason for invading Iraq.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, it was obvious. I mean, you didn't quite spell it out, but it was obvious. But because none of the explanations made the slightest sense.
Right. It was for Greater Israel.
Yeah, yeah.
And notice how Greater Israel has grown. You see, originally it's from the Nile to the Euphrates. And then last year, an Israeli minister said, well, we've modified it. It now includes half of Saudi Arabia. So now it's not just part of Iraq stopping at the Euphrates, it's the rest of the country and in half of Saudi Arabia. And then, even more recently, an Israeli minister says, well, actually now it includes Pakistan. So, and Saudi Arabia was trying to get some kind of an alliance to get under the Pakistani nuclear umbrella. So, Great Israel now is from the Nile through Pakistan, and they will use the United States to achieve that. And the vast majority of Trump supporters are in Israel's pocket. You know, Charlie Kirk was very pro-Israel, and then he started noticing, and he was changing. He became critical. That's when he was assassinated.
And they wielded the money. I mean, suddenly you got all these people like Bill Ackman, billionaires. They suddenly start applying pressure, with their serious money. So if one billionaire leaves, another billionaire, suddenly your whole operation is in jeopardy. I mean, and that was a real threat that he was now facing. The whole thing could just dissolve without all these billionaire backers.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. And I think Israel has regained control over that
Yes,
organization. And the thing about it is, almost all American conservatives, to the extent, say, I don't think conservatives exist anymore like they used to, but they call themselves conservatives, but all of them are in Israel's pocket.
sure.
They're, the Republican Party is more firmly in Israel's pocket than the Democrats. And the reason is that the Democrats have become the party of the immigrant invaders. And the United States now has 43 Muslim mayors. It has Democrat members of Congress who are Muslim or some other immigrant invader. Uh, they're prosecutors and judges.
Sure.
And so, uh, like in Minneapolis, the Biden regime located 80,000 Somalis in the city, a reliable voting bloc for the Democrats. And they took advantage of it. You may be aware of the scandals of how they ripped
Yeah,
off the welfare system to the tune of billions of dollars.
right,
But the Democrats don't abandon them.
right,
And they, in Minnesota, where the scandal came up, the governor and the mayor are very carefully using the ICE operations to push the scandal news off the front page.
right,
So,
right,
so in that sense, we could have a situation where uh, what retrieves the United States from Israel's pocket are the immigrant invaders.
right. How do you see when you said conservatives they're all in Israel's pocket? What about people like Tucker Carlson or Megyn Kelly? I mean, how do you explain that?
Well, they're marginalized. They're kicked out. They have both of them were highly popular shows. And
Right,
Tucker Carlson was the biggest moneymaker Fox has ever had. But they were ordered to get rid of him. And I think the same with Megan. Israelis simply said, you can't have these people. And so, well, the Israelis basically control the American media. If they're not the owners, they're the executives.
Well, they're getting to be pretty much the owners these days,
Yeah.
just outright ownership.
Yeah. You see, the American media was concentrated in Clinton's last year when he permitted six mega companies to monopolize the American media. And so it wasn't a very good media to start with, but now it has no independence. And their six companies have 90% of all the news sources, of the traditional news sources. So and those companies are basically in Israeli hands or Jewish hands, which usually is the same thing. So we have the real interesting situation, George, where Trump parades around as the master of the universe, and he's not even the master of his own country.
That's so true. But I guess it's part of the irony of the peace president who seems to be waging wars all the time. He's just picking fights and wars all the time. He demands that he be given the Nobel Peace Prize. So it's like, yeah, exactly. There's one of the many incongruities of Donald Trump. So anyway, thank you so much. That was a really fascinating conversation. Thank you for your time. Look forward to speaking to you again very soon. So thank you.
Yeah, George, I very much enjoy discussing with you and Peter LaBelle. There's so few people with
Unfortunately,
a awake mind.
right.
It's hardly anybody to talk to, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you again. See you soon.
All right.